life and most of ours, I mean, I'm 51 years old, I'll turn 52 next February. Allman Brothers have always been around. They were a part of my life and a part of my listening growing up. For the most part, if you grew up in the 70s and 80s, by that point, radio had started to become a little bit segmented, and we had very particular Allman Brothers songs that were on the radio. So I knew Midnight Rider, One Way Out. Sometimes they would play Statesboro Blues, but the first song I remember hearing doesn't even involve Duane or Barry Oakley, who are in this picture, sort of. Barry's on the far side there, was the song Jessica, which is a 1973 song that they did that I thought was by the Grateful Dead. Why? Because they were the only people I knew who played music like that. I was probably 16 years old. I was in Stewart driving south on US 1 and heard it on, I was stuck at the Roosevelt Bridge, if you've ever had that problem before. And I was like, oh my God. And they announced it was the Allman Brothers afterwards. I was like, well, that's weird. I thought that was something else. Then really where it really all started for me, everybody asked me this question, and I say this in the book. I got a decade of hits from the BMG Music Club. And let me see, I have that picture. I don't, I took it out. Let me set up the stage real quick. Who here did the Columbia House 13 for a penny, BMG 13 for a penny? So BMG had the better deal 100% of the time. BMG also had a loophole where you could sign up your friend and get 4 free and they would get 13 free. So I signed up my roommate, Erwin M. Fletcher. And if you've ever watched the Chevy Chase movies, that comes from Fletch. Fletch got decade of hits. And this is how I was increasing my musical collection. It was how I was listening to learning more music, was you'd get greatest hits collections. Every apartment that I know of in college had Steve Miller Band's greatest hits. One set of friends had Rush's Chronicles, which was a double CD, so that was double expensive. And I got this Decade of Hits Allman Brothers compilation. What's really interesting is the band was not a hit maker. In fact, none of the songs on the record, I think one of them hit the top 40. Crazy Love in 1979. So it wasn't even the early stuff. They were not a singles band. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But what I heard on that album was music that I loved. It didn't sound like what was on classic rock radio, which at that point was, the rock music, Southern rock was called Southern rock, and, had a very similar boogie sound. Molly Hatchet. The band I'm thinking of is 38 Special from Jacksonville. Those bands had a much more tamed down sound, and the Allman Brothers songs they played on the radio were very similar to that as well. I preferred what I heard on Decade of Hits was this whole different version of music. And I think the song that really did it for me on that album was the song Dreams, which is one of the first songs the band recorded. Actually, one of the first songs they played together, and one of the first original songs that they recorded. Still to this day, one of my absolute favorite movements of music by them. Briefly, I've got a whole bunch of other favorites, but that's my favorite kind of song that they play. But what I heard was something just completely original, blues country. That was a haunting quality to it. The instrumentals were beautiful. I was absolutely blown away by it. Then I still am today. Then I got to the story. The virtuosity of the band, the tragedy of Duane's death, and then in 1972, Barry Oakley also died, and the fact that the band continued on. And that's for me, for Bob, as I approached this story, that was something that really resonated with me, was they had this tragic loss in 1971. So I'm skipping some parts, assuming that Duane Allman died right as things started taking off. I should maybe start there, but everybody, this is kind of common knowledge, so I don't restate it. When he died, this band was right about ready to take off. All of his effort was going. He was 24 years old. His brother, Gregg, was 23 years old. And they kept going, and it's always amazed me. It's given me a lot to think about in my own life when I've suffered tragedies and stuff like that as it goes through. People ask me why I wrote the book. And here's the number one thing. I read a review of another book that said this other book was terrible. It was a book called Midnight Riders. It was the first biography written about the Allman Brothers band. I loved it, still do, But another historian, I wasn't even a historian yet, wrote and said it was terrible, and he explained why. He didn't like the fact that that piece didn't say anything about why the story happened, how it unfolded. It was a very straight chronological narrative. I have been thinking about that review since about 1995, 96 when I read it. Sometime in about 1997 or 8, I wrote down a goal that I wanted to write a book on the Allman Brothers Band. I still can't believe I had the hubris to do that at 26, 27 years old. I had no idea what it would be. I had no idea where we would end up with today, but that became my goal. I did a lot of research on this book to get away from the standard stories that we hear or have read. Listen, the Layla story, when Duane Allman joins Eric Clapton and they record that album, has been very, very, very well told. The fact that the Allman Brothers Band played the last show ever at Fillmore East has been very, very, very well told. I wanted to get to a certain different direction, and I was talking to Ben about this outside before we started. And my goal was to basically listen, try to find out what it was the Allman Brothers Band were trying to accomplish, and then talk about how the research. Let me back up. I got distracted as I was spilling this one out. My goal was twofold. Number one, I was really blown away by the Allman Brothers Band, and I wanted to know more. The second thing was, though, I couldn't just announce that they were the greatest thing ever. I mean, I could. There's a lot of people in here who would agree with me on that. I hope you would. But frankly, greatest ever and to whom is always the question you have to ask. Great isn't really a preference, or greatest is a personal preference, but maybe not a group preference. So what does it mean? And what I had to do was say, what was it Duane was trying to accomplish with his music? What did he say? What did he believe in? And then how did that manifest itself into this project that we know that's at Fillmore East, is kind of most famous of all the things that they did there. It's not enough that I think that they're great. What was the group trying to accomplish, and what did people at the time say? That's why the Independent, Florida Alligator, and many other publications like that, college newspapers, gave me information. We were talking today about Rory O'Connor from Tampa. He wrote one of the greatest pieces in early Allman Brother lore in the Tampa Tribune in an article in November 1969. They were together for like 6 months, 8 months, and he got it to such an extent that Barry Oakley wrote his wife from New York and said, you got to check out this article that ran in the Tampa Tribune. They get it. And I wanted to find more of that. And so I did. And I spent a lot of time in archives, in libraries. I spent a lot of time at history organizations like this. They mean a lot to this research. One of the greatest treasure troves in the world is a lot of college newspapers are now digitized. So I was able to do a lot of my research from home. That is stuff that our federal tax dollars supported. And God, I am so grateful for it, because the information I was able to do is I now have access to it, and had a lot of access to it. So what are some things that I learned as I go through? Number one is the story really does center in place. And I got two pictures here to represent two places. On the left, this is Daytona Beach, Florida. This is right by the band shell where Duane and Gregg are originally from. I'll talk about that briefly in a bit. And on the right, that's actually Macon, Georgia. That's the home where I finished this damn thing, in that front room on the left, February of 2021. And I just do that because the story does center in the South. It begins in the South. It launches from the South. The Allman Brothers Band continued to be in the South. And this is despite the fact that the music industry had zero interest whatever in the South at this point, except in exporting talent, taking talent out, putting it to work in bigger situations. This is the South of the small towns. This is the suburban towns. This is university towns where the story happens. And Gainesville is a really important part of this story. So I'm gonna do a quick interlude that's not huge in the book. Who here is familiar with the Lipham music story? Who here has shopped at Lipham Music? Who here has played guitars at Lipham Music? All right, how many? 4, 5, 6 people. Awesome, that's fine. Who here took lessons at Lipham Music from some of the famous people? Who'd you take lessons? Anybody famous? Nobody famous, but you took lessons at a place where Tom Petty used to give guitar lessons, and so did I can see Led. Who's the Don Felder also gave guitar lessons. Thank you. I was stuck on the Leddens. What's that? Fantastic. So I'm going to show you this real quick because the ones on the right there. The biggest thing for Buster Lipham that I think is so awesome is the fact that he advanced the Allman Brothers tens of thousands of dollars worth of gear. Basically, as long as he got to put his little badge on them. This is, I think, Dickey Betts's Fender head. I think it's a Fender Bassman. I can't see it, but that's logo. This is original, still there. Those guys were paying him monthly by check. The checks still circulate because they actually were found at a warehouse in Macon, and they were autographed Allman Brothers things. So there's checks from Butch Trucks. There's checks from Duane Allman and Barry Oakley buying gear from Lipham's music. Now, excuse me, do I have? No, I don't have them here yet. Beyond that, Gainesville, we know Lipham is kind of the hub. We've got Stephen Stills here for a very brief period of time. Don Felder's dad worked for the university, so he's here. He's of the Eagles. Bernie Ledden, also of the Eagles, flying Burrito Brothers. I already said Stills. Who's the other one I'm missing? Oh, Tom Petty. Excuse me. This is what's amazing to me. Gainesville is such a music hub, considering it's such a, honestly, I love this town, but it's a backwater, particularly even at this point. There's a lot going on here. And we have probably some of the more famous Allman Brothers concerts here. Some of you, was anybody here at this concert at Gainesville High School? I do worship at the ground that you walk on. In 1969, the Allman Brothers band played the Southeast Pop Contest Labor Day weekend. We actually don't know if it was on Saturday or Sunday or Monday, because Labor Day weekend anyway. But I think it was probably Sunday. They were ineligible for the contest because they had already signed a contract with essentially Atlantic Records. But they played as a favor to Buster Lipham. And those of y'all who were there, and I know Marty Gerard put some pieces on there too. I've got a quote in there. It was an absolutely mind-blowing experience. And it's at a damn high school gym. You have something you need to say quick?
I was just going to say quickly, it's the greatest experience of my life. Of one of these things that's not like the other.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it too, because that is essentially what I take from it too, is like, yeah, and that's what Marty's piece has said. Unfortunately, there's no record of this. Like, I didn't find anything written about it. Everything comes later. And you got to be careful with that stuff, but I really appreciate you saying that. I'm gonna record you saying that in just a little bit. The Allman Brothers came back through one more time that I can find in Duane's time. They played the Rathskeller on April 17th, 1970. Were y'all there as well? Nice, rock on. Very good. The Bandshell, and I don't know what they did in the 70s. They played the Bandshell in '82, which has a video. To me, I'll be honest with you, it's one of the worst. It's the nadir of the Allman Brothers band in my eyes there. They played in November of 1993. I cannot remember where it was. I actually saw the next night, but they also played here in 1995 with Government Mule opened at the O'Connell Center. And I know the Allman Brothers played regularly here as we went through. Gainesville is important to this, not just because of us. Well, can I go backwards? I turned it off. Not just because of Buster Lipham, but also because, not just because of this particular concert, but also because this is where people are and enjoying the band. College towns are vital and very important for bands as they're trying to get there, as they go through. So let me fast forward a whole bunch of time. So I'm just setting up the scene a little bit to get you in the general understanding of the story and the parameters of it. Sorry, I'm not checking my text. I keep a timer going. There we go. So in 2013, I began my PhD. I was telling Ben this earlier. In 2012, my mother passed away from cancer very suddenly. And it just hit me, one of those things like, I've got to achieve this goal I set for myself a long time ago. And I started getting my PhD at the University, Middle Tennessee State University. I knew all along I was going to do something on Duane Allman. That was my goal when I went through. And I struggle with the task. I've been working on this in some way, shape, or form since the mid-90s, especially looking back on it now. The amount of information I've consumed just looking at this is, I hesitate to even think about how much time I've thought about it or spent time doing it. Also realizing that all the times, the hours I've been listening to music, been playing music, been reading about music, meant something to where I was going with this story. It all kind of came together at the end, kind of like I guess life sometimes does there. I wasn't looking for an outcome. I didn't know what in the heck I was going to find. And it took a friend of mine, Spencer Downing, who read my entire 500-page dissertation and said, quote, "You just wrote a book on At Fillmore East." I just want to say, I have a friend who read 500 pages of a dissertation, 144,000 words, which was essentially me throwing everything I knew about Duane Allman and the Allman Brothers together into something that 4 PhDs would sign off on, and then all the other PhDs up the food chain would agree that their decision was the right decision. That's my tongue-in-cheek about administration at universities. I will stop there. So what I had to do at that point when Spencer said that is I had to reconsider the album in a whole nother way. I was telling Ben about this earlier. In the streaming age, an album doesn't really mean a lot, or it doesn't mean the same. I had to think about 1971. This was their third shot. They had failed with 2 albums. They were all in on a live album because it was the only way they thought they could capture what this gentleman was talking about one of these things is not like the other. They were this good a band, but nobody was listening to them except people who showed up live until this album came out. I had to conceive of the album as an album and as a carefully curated document, that it wasn't live random jamming. It sounds like it. It sounds so natural. It sounds like they're talking because they are. That's how I hear it, at least. But they curated that album. They made choices. It is not a live concert put on record. It is 7 tracks arranged in a certain order, arranged a certain way so that people would capture the band. And guess what? It worked. And it worked. Here's how I know, because we're all here today, and University Press just went in on a book to hopefully some people will buy it and enjoy it as it goes through the story. The other thing I had to learn about a little bit is about the artist himself. I spent a lot of time with Duane. I know him and his career. I had to think about a lot of others. If you don't know, that's Duane there. If you're not sure, he's grinning kind of slyly because he has a bag of drugs in his hand. No shit, that's a true story. And they're all laughing also because he just scored some drugs when it goes there. But one of the key things, and I look at music, I put this on my Twitter bio, that music is my sports, the Allman Brothers are my baseball, and they're my team. And the idea being that teams are made up where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Teams get together to achieve something together. I think this band is the ultimate example of that. Duane Allman was an absolute star when he formed this band. And he chose, instead of going and writing his own ticket, he chose to grab with a band of complete unknowns, 5 other guys, including his own brother, and try to take on the world when he gets there. Duane could not do this on his own. I'm going to get with the bane of any Allman Brothers fans. Question is, the Allman Brothers, isn't he married to Cher? This is a question we get forever. What I thought about as I approached this book and when I talk around folks like y'all is the band was so much more than that tabloid celebrity that we know. I want to know this. Duane founded the band in 1989. And by the 90s, when I came to it, the legacy and the reputation of the band was great. But this was after absolute decades of decline prior to that. And that 1982 video from the band shell is an example of that. Was just a completely different band than this on the left or the band that formed on the right. I wanted to look at what was the real-time influence of the Allman Brothers band, and I wanted to really think about how did Duane's influence stick with the band throughout its life. The surviving members, and they're all arrayed on stage, the 2 drummers there, that's Butch Trucks in the green shirt, and Jaimoe's between, and there's Gregg. The other 4 guys are newer, but they were this is the longest lineup of the Allman Brothers band throughout. And they all talk about this, going back to the original sound, the original band. And was that true? And I found it was, which we'll find a little bit more. We also wanted to look at how the music industry perceived them as well. They were received very well critically. They're often compared to the original band, but what in the world did that look like? I found flat out that the band did things that no other band did then, does today, and continued following that path. And almost everybody that encountered them has that experience with them and has said that, at least what I found going through. Duane's the focus of this effort. He's the one who pulled the band together. He subsumed his own ego and his talent and created something that was more than what he could do himself. And this is what I expected to find. I really did. The band was also fronted by two brothers. I expected to find this sort of sense of brotherhood and camaraderie that comes out of the 1960s, 1970s when folks go. And this is true about many bands from the South when they go through. And when you think about the name, the Allman Brothers Band, they didn't love the name, actually. Duane didn't at all, because it put him in the front and his brother in the front. This was a band that was very much leaderless throughout its era, even though one guy was kind of the focus of all of the effort, which was Duane as we go through. There are 5 things that undergird this story that you'll see that stick throughout. So all of these things I'm telling you are ways I had to grapple with how to tell this story. Number 1 is the region that we came from. American music, quintessentially Southern. I think music is the South's probably greatest export culturally to America and to the world. And if you just have to think about jazz to say that, jazz is a truly American art form. Duane and the Allman Brothers Band are found at this intersection of American music and Southern music. And they were unabashedly pro is the wrong word. They were unabashedly Black in influence and in style and in the music that they pursued, including, by the way, having an integrated band when they went through. Second thing, the South. Number 2 is Duane himself. I mean, this is not a biography of Duane Allman. It's a story. It's a biography of the Allman Brothers Band sound and how it manifests itself in the At Fillmore East album. There's a million directions that we could go with this story. I could go a million directions. I wrote 144,000 words on it that I had to pare down to 85,000 that some of you will read today. I think it's pretty amazing. Duane's story in and of itself was because of the fact that he made his mark as a guy who didn't sing. He didn't write songs. He really didn't lead the band much on stage. He was their band leader, but he wasn't the front man in that classic sense. He was in an integrated band that formed and stayed in the American South to make his way. And that's pretty incredible to me. His bandmates are really an important part of this story. These guys are who helped Duane manifest and put his vision into action. All of them are very heavily influenced by Southern music. And then really there's a psychedelic aspect to it. These are Southern hippies as we go through. This picture's from Macon. This is where the first album cover was taken, Beale Mansion, which is still there. That's Dickey Betts looking like Doc Holliday on the far left. Barry Oakley, immediately next to him, Johnny Johnson, Jaimoe, the African-American man, fierce dude in the middle. That's Duane, Butch Trucks with the hat. And then there's Gregg, politically incorrect with a cigarette in his hands as we go through. The next step was music industry support. Here's the problem. To get big, you needed help. You needed to sign a record contract. Records and record sales are what earned bands credibility and also the money to stay on the road. And the biggest help with this, where's Phil? Phil Walden is in the darker jacket, the white dude in the darker jacket. That's his brother Alan in the sort of tan jacket. He ends up leading and managing the career of Lynyrd Skynyrd, among other things, as we go through. The final thing is the audience. That would be us. I can't get into this in depth, and I won't because it'll take far too long, but I had to learn about what's called reception theory. How do you know if what a musician or an artist is trying to do works? And the way you do is, what is it that the audience is saying about the music versus what it is the musician himself is saying about the music, and sort of find a way to jibe those two together. And the audience is who accepted the Allman Brothers as authentic, and they also helped reshape stereotypes about the American South. And I don't have a lot of time to talk about that issue, but Patterson Hood calls it the duality of the Southern thing. If anybody knows the drive-by truckers, it's something any Southerner of of my generation lives with. I found in the Allman Brothers the best of the South, the best of the American South. And one of it is not only the cooperation of how they got along as musicians, but the music they made represents the best of the best in my absolutely not humble opinion on those things. I want to read one quote from one audience member that is actually in the book. Miller Francis Jr. said when he saw the band in May 1969 at Piedmont Park, "There are times when it's easy to think that the rock and roll musician is the most militant, subversive, effective, whole, together, powerful force for radical change on this planet. Other times you know it's true." And he's writing about the Allman Brothers band. All right, let's do some more centering of the story. Two brothers. This is my favorite picture of Duane Allman and Gregg Allman. This was my desktop wallpaper the first time I got a Windows computer. I could spend an hour talking to you about this, and I won't. But the thing that I love about this picture is both of them are so focused on their instruments. And to me, I look at this picture and I just think about two guys, two dudes, two brothers dedicated to their craft when we go through. They're Nashville natives. They basically grew up in Daytona Beach, Florida. They spent some time back in Nashville in military school. Music plays a huge role in their life throughout. And the biggest change in their life was when they went to a Jackie Wilson concert. The dates are kind of fuzzy. This is from Gregg Allman's autobiography, which is also fuzzy on some dates from time to time. Sometime probably summer 1970. This is not the poster from the show. I just grabbed the second one to fill the screen, but it's an idea of the bands that were playing and the bands that the group was interested in at the time. The key was this, though, as everybody's going nuts in the auditorium, Gregg remembers Duane sitting there transfixed watching it, and he turns to Gregg and says something to the effect of, "Little brother, we got to get into this." And they were like 13 years old at the time. And from 1960 forward, that's all they were trying. Got bit by the fever is what the term that they use when you go through. I'm going to skip this one real quick. Y'all may know, or some of you might remember when the Allman Joys were running around town, pretty much the first of the Florida garage bands, the only to kind of make it out of their hometown when they went through. The picture on the left, again, another one of my favorites. Those of you who saw the show in 1969 or any other time you've seen the Allman Brothers, did anybody do the frug or whatever the hell dances that they're doing in the front here, the swim or whatever else? It cracks me up looking at these people, and not necessarily because I'm making fun of how preppy they are and they're dressed. It's the fact that they're doing like boogie dances to the Allman Joys. And this is literally the Allman. Did anybody here see them? You saw the Allman Joys? Yeah. Right on. Fantastic. These guys were a cover band, and they were a really good cover band. Everybody loved them, but they really couldn't play anything that was original. So eventually they joined up with a band called the Hourglass. Now, this is probably another one of my favorite pictures. I show it all the time because of the damn doily around Duane's neck. Please laugh with the doily around the neck, because seriously, that's a fierce guitar player there playing. In 1967, the Allman Joys joined forces with Paul Hornsby on the keyboard, and then behind him on drums is Johnny Sandlin, as a band eventually they called themselves the Hourglass, and it's their second attempt at fame. And they go out to LA, they get dressed up in these ridiculous clothes. The label decides they're going to pick the material. And honestly, it was a miserable experience for the band, an absolute miserable experience for all of them. Two really poorly recorded albums. And in the midst of things, they go to, do I have this picture? I don't. They go to Muscle Shoals to record a demo. This demo is on the Dreams box set, if you've ever heard it. But the probably most famous track on it is a B.B. King cover when you go through. They loved this recording. They bring it back to LA. They went to Muscle Shoals. They bring it back to LA, and the record company absolutely says, forget it. I don't want it. I don't like it. Basically, Duane quits. The band breaks up. He heads back to Florida, where a group of people is doing some stuff up in Jacksonville. The Second Coming, that is Dickey Betts here. And then that's Barry Oakley with the big, does this have a thingy on it? The big white bass on the upper side there. This is the beginning of a partnership that really changed American music. Oakley and Barry Oakley and Dickey Betts had just moved to Jacksonville. There was a place called The Scene that had hosted them. And they got together and played original music that, as Dickey Betts said, he had all these great ideas to play original music, except they didn't make us any money. He knew how to keep us broke, Barry Oakley did, when they went through. They formed this really robust jamming scene in and around a place called Willow Branch Park in Jacksonville. This is a place, the way that Dickey said it is, Barry had a mind for gathering people together. So Duane Allman was the guitarist and the guy with the vision for the music. Barry built that music and said, I got a vision for gathering people together as well. Dickey Betts was the #1 guitar player in the state of Florida, actually, because Duane had been gone. So all of a sudden, Duane comes in, and there's a little bit of a competition between the two when you go through. As this is happening, Duane gets a call to go up to Muscle Shoals and record with Wilson Pickett. This is the famous track when Duane records Hey Jude, convinces Wilson Pickett to do it. I got the whole story in the book. And I don't say that to force you to buy the book, except I don't have enough time to tell the full story. But Duane records this track with Wilson Pickett and has this absolute scorching solo at the end. It's like he's been unleashed. And it immediately draws the attention of the record companies. It immediately draws the attention of Phil Walden at eventually what's now called Capricorn Records. He convinces him to do that. He convinces Pickett to record it. Pickett did not want to record the Beatles. It is a massive hit, this version of Hey Jude. I'm not going to say I prefer it because I think it's illegal to prefer a cover to a Beatles song, but it's close, man. It's very close for me. Some of you are laughing too. While he's there, he meets Johnny Johnson, Jaimoe. That's the dude on the left there. And Jaimoe is a drummer. He's actually a rhythm and blues drummer who has decided he wants to play jazz. So he goes to Muscle Shoals to meet up with Duane. They immediately hit it off. I see Return to Forever's there. Certain Mahavishnu Orchestra didn't play here, but that is what he said they sounded like when he and Duane played together, and then when he and Barry. And I say that to any of you music heads out here that will respect and appreciate the great Mahavishnu Orchestra being used in anything to do with music, but that's what Jaimoe said, not what I said. Butch Trucks is there in the foreground in the picture on the right. He has long been a fan and friend of the Allman Joys, of the Allman Brothers. They were in a band right before this called the 31st of February. There's this 3-week period in September 68 where Duane quits Hourglass, joins 31st of February, records, tours, and then he ends up in Muscle Shoals, and that's kind of where he gets his start. This is an amazing, I tracked this whole story down to about 3 weeks to figure out what in the world they were doing at that time period. March 23rd, 1969, 5 of the original 6 Allman Brothers get together in this front room of this house, 2844 Riverside Avenue in Jacksonville, to do what we call today, it's called the Jacksonville Jam. There is a historical marker there now. You can see it. That house is actually owned by an Allman Brothers fan, believe it or not. Didn't even know the connection when he moved in. Basically, they played for about 3 hours. Gregg was not there. At the end of the 3rd hour, basically, Duane got into the room. He said, anybody here doesn't want to play in my band is going to have to fight their way out. That's the famous joke, or the famous apocryphal story when they go through. He calls Gregg that day. Well, this is where the timeline gets a little mushy, but they call Gregg, who was still in LA, and he says, hey, Gregg, this is my quote. These cats love to play. They're all really into their instruments. They can sing a little bit. There's not a whole lot of writing going on. So I need you to come and sing and write and round it all up and send it in some sort of direction. Gregg arrives 3 days later, and that's where it starts. Now, this is an absolute band of killers across the board. And this picture's in the book. Another one that I love, and I just encourage you, look at Gregg, look at Duane, look at Jaimoe. Everybody's basically looking at their instruments, except Butch is looking at Barry, and Barry's looking directly at Duane as he's going. I'm like one of those people, when I look at pictures of bands and stuff, I'm always looking and seeing what's going on. 6 musicians include, where are we going here? All those things didn't capture through, so we're going to blaze through this as we go through. Jaimoe, Johnny Johnson, drummer, stage right, African-American guy there. I mentioned earlier, he was a jazz head. and he's who brought the jazz to the band. Barry Oakley, who's on the far right, is really the linchpin of the Allman Brothers band. As a bass player, I'm not even going to get into what the bass does versus what the drums do, et cetera, but he played what you would really call lead bass. He's constantly soloing. If you listen, if you're not used to listening to the bass, I can spend my life listening to the way that he weaves lines. Butch Trucks, wearing the hat, staring on drums. Butch, I tell you, many things I can say about Butch. Number one is he is an absolute rock solid drummer. Why two drums is a question that gets asked a lot. Jaimoe asked Duane, and Duane said, because James Brown and Otis Redding have two drummers. And Jaimoe says, I never thought about it more. Duane said a few more things about it, and I think the best thing to say is two. One is Jaimoe is a very unique drummer. He's a jazz drummer, and he was not the right drummer to be the only drummer in this ensemble. I think the second thing is what he said. We're going to be playing a lot of music, and we couldn't just have one guy flogging his ass off all night. We needed a little bit of help. So that's when they went through. Dickey Betts, who is absolutely in the middle, but if you look closely, Dickey is between the drummers. If you ever want to look, again, nerd stuff, Dickey a lot of times is behind the drummers in this era. He stands back there. I think he's uncomfortable, honestly, being in the spotlight when he goes. Dickey Betts is from West Palm Beach, Florida. Originally grew up on the other coast, more or less like Manatee County, Bradenton area from there. Huge country and Western fan, huge fan of Western swing music. And he brings that to this ensemble playing when he goes, when he joins the Allman Brothers. The last two are really the first two, Gregg and Duane. Gregg plays organ. He writes songs. He is the front man for the band. He sings, and he ends up leading the band really for the rest of its life when he goes through. They moved to Macon really quickly. They get in trouble for drugs in Jacksonville and maybe a gun charge. There was a gun something going on at that house there. And they moved to Macon and lived in the big house there on Vineville Avenue. This is actually 2321 Vineville. It is now a museum to the Allman Brothers band and has been for 10 or 12 years now, something like that. It got rescued. The band lived there, and from Macon, they did, do I have another picture? They did probably 300 days on the road for the first 2 years that they were going. They did not play 300 concerts. That's like something that they used to say, but they were on the road most of the time in those first 2 years. It wore them out and damn near killed them. Actually killed Duane. Fillmore East comes out in July of 1971, and it takes a little bit of time, but after about 6 weeks, it ends up hitting gold. Right about the time the Allman Brothers got noticed, actually shortly before this letter was sent, Duane dies in his accident. One of my favorite quotes, I found this at the big house. I want to say that M. Scripps starts by saying he's complaining. He says, I don't have this in here, but he said, I sat down and I smoked some weed. And after spending this money on my record, I smoked weed and then I listened to your record. And here's my complaint. So I cut out the first part. After spending a whole bunch of money on records, I purchased this when I listened to it. My complaint is, you have just screwed up all of my music listening for life. And it's similar to what you said there. And a lot of us come to that. What did audiences say about this? They said it was the greatest thing they heard. Many people did as went through. This is only 2 years after that jam in Jacksonville that they recorded all of that. March of 1971, we go through. Sadly, Duane did not live to see much of the success that the band achieved. He died October 29th, 1971. The band actually played a gig at the funeral, and I got a picture of that in the book. It's one of the most amazing, I don't know how many times I've said amazing tonight, but it amazes me that these young people got up and played. And actually, Kaylin and I sang at my brother's service 2 years ago, now that I think about it, and it's going to make me cry thinking about it. So just don't look at me. But I adopted that myself. My brother and I played at my mother's service. It was just like, wow, this is what you do, I guess, when you go through. The band played a gig at the funeral. But the key piece to me is that the band outlived Duane Allman by 43 years. This is the interior of the Brothers and Sisters album, which was their biggest hit ever. It hit number two. Well, Ramblin' Man, this album hit number one. Ramblin' Man hit number two as a single. They were at the forefront of the Southern rock era. And we're not going to talk about that tonight because I actually want to answer some questions, and I'm just about coming to the end of this when it comes through. Dickey Betts said the Allman Brothers band developed like a Polaroid picture. And I'm assuming now, because Polaroids are back, does everybody understand when I say what a Polaroid picture is? Even you youngins, you guys sort of get it. You remember the picture would come into life as you sat there. He said nobody knew what it was going to be when we went into it. But they all knew that there was something special in terms of music and the connections they felt to each other. He said, we knew what we had. It was something that honored each individual member's individual roots. And it was something that proved the point that Duane didn't want to be a solo artist. He assembled the pieces of his new band the way he wanted to, musical equals, a band where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And these band members brought a melting pot of influences to the music. Most of them were steeped in rhythm and blues. Jaimoe was a jazz man. Barry Oakley, Dickey Betts, and Duane and Gregg were heavily influenced by urban blues. Dickey Betts was intimately familiar with country music. Dickey Betts and Barry Oakley, very interested in psychedelic music that was coming out from San Francisco. Very interesting to me, Butch Trucks was a folkie, and his bands were folk rock. And Gregg Allman actually considered himself a bit of a folk writer or folk rock songwriter as he went. And Butch Trucks loved classical music. And I'm going to say this about Butch Trucks and classical music. If you want to understand where the classical music comes in, two things happen. One is the ebb and flow of the music, particularly the long musical passages. Whipping Post is like that. In Memory of Elizabeth Reed is like that. But even Hotlanta is like that on Fillmore East. But the second is specifically as he used the timpani a lot. And that is an instrument that he played in the symphony orchestra back in Jacksonville. Each of these guys is pretty road-hardened veterans of the Southern touring circuit. The circuit that honestly the Great Southern ends up being a part of later, but Gainesville is a part of this story as we go through. And together, I think they came up with something very unique and singular in American music, the Allman Brothers music as they go through. My goal was to try and figure out why so many people have a reverence for Duane Allman. I was trying to figure it out for myself, frankly. If you read the book and you don't like my take, it's because it's a pretty unique take to me. I can universalize the experiences, or at least I tried to, but I don't know that you'll exactly come to those conclusions. So beyond the passion and the singular drive, I think he's proof to me that one person can change history. And I want to finish with a quote that he said. I love being, this was in his journal. This is on his grave. Kaylin, you've seen that. I took you there a couple summers ago. I love being alive, and I will be the best man I possibly can. I will take love where I find it and offer it to everyone who will take it, seek knowledge from those wiser, and teach those who wish to learn from me. So we're here. It's 50 plus years later since he died. I'm going to end at that point. I don't want to take up too much. Martha's asking about is the recording of Fillmore East. The Allman Brothers were the middle band on the bill. And the reason we got these extended versions of the songs is because Johnny Winter was the headliner that weekend. And after the first show, the first night, his manager basically said, we can't have the Allman Brothers open for Johnny because they blew him off the stage, and they blew everybody off the stage. So they switched slots on Saturday, which meant the Allman Brothers, Fillmore East played an early and a late show. And they switched slots on Saturday. So they played both late shows, which meant they got like 90-minute, 2-hour, 3-hour sets instead of a shorter set that they had. So doing that that's where you get the 22-minute, a 19-minute whipping. So are there Zoomers paying attention? So what Martha said is it does seem weird that Johnny Winter would do that. Yeah. And I honestly, there's plenty of stories about that happening where bands were just blown away by the Allmans when they were an opening act. I don't think it was humble. I think it was, I don't want to get shown up again. Yeah, honestly. I do not know if it was all so the question he asked was the gear on the album cover. There's a mound of gear behind them. Was it all Lipham stuff? I don't know. I do know, and I don't know, and I should, whether any of those amps were used at Fillmore East, but I'm certain they were. All of it, I would say probably not. Good bit of it, fair chance it came from Lipham. I don't know if they name checked him on Fillmore East, but I know that they did it on Idlewild South for sure. Yes, sir.
Are you aware of the credit on that album for the sound production company, Carter
So the question is, am I aware of the Carlos Sound credit on the album? Yes.
And a lot of that equipment was there.
Okay, so he's saying Carlos Sound. So Carlos Sound was, and we've got some pictures with Carlos Sound gear behind the Allman Brothers. They were very gear. They were, especially when they got money.
They were the second biggest sound production band in the East Coast at the time.
Where were they? Were they out of Atlanta?
They were out of Nashville.
Nashville. Okay. Other thoughts? Yes, ma'am. Boss lady. They did, and I'll say, yes, they did. And they had spoken a few times, and Dickey was at Gregg's funeral in Macon. Okay, two more questions. Yes, sir.
Did you go?
I lost track of how many times I saw the Allman Brothers band from 93 forward. Yeah, I did the first one, I did the 2011, and I did the last one. The last one with the band was at.
What do you think of Derek?
Derek is he's my dude. He's I'm a huge fan, and partially because he fits very well with this story that I have in my head about what this is, but I think he feels this. I feel that he sees the story similar to I do. It's a family story for him, though. It's legit family. I'm just ancillary to it. But, you know, I'm not one who would say that Derek Trucks is the second coming of Duane Allman, because I think that's really unfair to Derek. But, you know, and I think I know he carved his own path and did it. It's not lost on me that he's put out this amazing album, you know, just now as I've finished like looking at his mentors, or one of his mentors' amazing albums too, as I've learned about it, you know. Yeah. Yes, sir. The question is about slide guitar. Duane definitely put slide guitar on the map in rock guitar. Absolutely 100%. There were others doing it. Jeff Beck did it on Beck's Bolero, but Duane got it from Statesboro Blues by Taj Mahal, and Jesse Ed Davis, who I think is Kiowa, American Indian, played slide guitar on that. And it's a Blind Willie McTell song. Duane copped it 100%. There's a couple stories about it, but the one that resonates the most was Gregg brought over a Coricidin bottle for a cold or for a broken arm or for something. I don't know. Duane got the label off of it and started playing slide, and, you know, almost immediately, well, they say almost immediately. And then there's a whole bunch of people saying, I don't know if you've ever heard anybody try to play slide, learn. I didn't do it for years because it sounded so awful. It was like dead duck. And I was like, I just want to play music. This sounds terrible. But he got it pretty quickly after that. Yes, sir. Two things. The first, for the benefit of the Zoom folks, I'll say, you mentioned Almond Joy's, the American Legion Hall. And then what was the other one you said? The Sundowner. Oh, Tom Petty. So this is one of the things in the book I'm really proud of that I did. This is my friend Spencer, the same one who told me that I wrote a book on Fillmore East that I had to figure out what it was. He wrote me this quote. He said, "Don't be afraid to talk about the Grateful Dead Allman Brothers stuff." And as an Allman Brothers fan, in the 90s, you were always defensive about how great the Allman Brothers were because the Dead got all the attention. This is my own biases. I'm going to say it. I'm a freak fanboy about the. Read the first page of the preface. You'll see. I own it. I own it. They did not set out to model themselves as the East Coast Southern Grateful Dead. They are to the South and the South's music and the South counterculture what the Grateful Dead were to San Francisco. Absolutely, no doubt. And the influence is real. They talk about it repeatedly. It is an aesthetic influence. It is how I attack music, how I attack life. You know, the South, listen, I'm a proud Southerner, but we're always a couple years behind trends and stuff like this, particularly when it comes to, there's a lot going on in California, and it took a while till it made its way down here. And the Allman Brothers, exemplars of that, absolute exemplars of that. And I feel good about how I wrote about that in the book, because you can be influenced, but not sound like, right? You can be influenced, but not talk about that influence. But when you listen to how they approach music, and the way I did it was listen to the bass players, Phil Lesh and Barry Oakley. And if you listen to how those guys drive their bands, it's very similar. And it makes sense. Lesh was a huge influence on Barry Oakley. By the way, Just Records, I'm not sure Barry Oakley ever saw the Grateful Dead live. So he's only listening to records. which is pretty, I mean, again, think about the influence and think about that. Those of you guys who remember when you'd spend your money on the record, it was the one record you had and you listened the shit out of it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. That's what's going on here. We don't do that anymore because every song I've ever listened to and want to in my life is right here. And I love it, but it overwhelms me. Pardon I'm sorry I should have asked you about cursing before I started. Yes, sir. So the question he asked about is Watkins Glen, which happens in July of 1973. And that is a 600,000 people attend a concert outside of Watkins Glen, New York at a racetrack, at the Watkins Glen racetrack. The Dead. I mean, my God, you're talking about the trinity of great American music bands. And even though the band is mostly Canadian, they're at that point in America. You've got the band, the Grateful Dead, and the Allman Brothers band, all of them playing multiple hours of a set. Honestly, I can't think of anything better, except the original Allman Brothers band being there. Yes, ma'am. So they had a farm in Juliet, the band did. And then there's famous pictures. I saw Cowboy on the wall here. There's some really famous pictures of the band playing at the Cowboy, what they called the Cowboy House, which I think has been torn down. But they had a farm outside Juliet. The band owned it. They called it ABBsule, and it was a financial freaking disaster. You guys feel captive, and I know it can be a lot to like sit here and stare at somebody talking, especially when he's a little bit nervous. As he goes. I appreciate all of you being here. I want to give another shout out to my homegirl here, Caitlin, for coming out and seeing me. So appreciate you, kid. And Caitlin for having me. So I'm going to sign books. And Caitlin, do you want to tell them how this goes or whatever? I'm here. I've got book and I'll talk this stuff all night. Although I've got hopefully a date here in just a little bit too. So we'll see. Thanks, y'all.